What happens when Prince Harry walks onto the set of The Late Show expecting another polished television appearance, only to discover that Stephen Colbert has no intention of letting the conversation remain comfortable? What happens when a few jokes turn into pointed questions, a smile slowly disappears, and an audience that came expecting entertainment suddenly realizes it may be watching something far more explosive? Tonight, we enter a fictional cinematic reenactment of that imagined confrontation, a tense television moment where every pause, every glance, and every carefully chosen word seems to carry more weight than the last. The studio was already alive before the cameras officially rolled. Bright white lights hung above the stage, throwing a warm glow across the familiar Late Show set. The band had just finished a short rehearsal, leaving a faint echo of music in the air. Audience members chatted quietly among themselves, some holding phones, others leaning toward friends and whispering with anticipation. Then the applause sign illuminated. The room erupted. Stephen Colbert walked onto the stage with his familiar confident smile, waving toward the audience before taking his place behind the desk. He looked relaxed, almost playful. But tonight, there was something different in the way he glanced toward the guest chair. A few seconds later, Prince Harry entered. The applause grew louder. Harry smiled politely and acknowledged the crowd before sitting down. His shoulders were straight, his expression controlled. He adjusted his jacket, crossed one leg over the other, and briefly glanced toward Colbert. The cameras moved closer. For the first few minutes, everything appeared normal. Colbert joked. Harry laughed. The audience responded. There were smiles, scattered applause, and the occasional burst of laughter. It looked like the kind of celebrity interview viewers had seen hundreds of times before. But then Colbert's tone changed. It happened so gradually that many people in the audience probably didn't notice it at first. The host leaned slightly forward. His smile remained, but his voice became more measured. Harry, you've talked publicly about your life many times, Colbert said. But tonight, I want to ask you something a little differently. Harry's smile remained in place. Go ahead. Colbert paused. The pause lasted only a few seconds, but suddenly the studio felt quieter. When you tell your story, Colbert continued, do you ever wonder whether people might see the situation differently than you do? Harry looked at him. His expression didn't change immediately. Then his eyebrows lifted slightly. I think everyone has their own perspective. Colbert nodded. Absolutely. He glanced down at his notes. Then back up. But that's exactly the point. The audience became noticeably quieter. Harry shifted in his chair. His right hand moved toward his cuff, adjusting it once before returning to his lap. Colbert noticed. He continued. Because when you're one of the most recognizable people in the world, every version of your story gets examined. Harry leaned back. I understand that. I know you do. Another pause. But sometimes, Colbert said, the public doesn't just want an explanation. They want to know what you think your own responsibility is. A faint murmur passed through the audience. Harry's expression tightened. He took a slow breath. I've taken responsibility for plenty of things. Colbert nodded. I believe you have. But there was something in his tone that made the sentence sound less like agreement and more like a doorway to the next question. Harry noticed it too. His eyes narrowed slightly. What are you getting at? Colbert looked directly at him. For the first time that evening, the smile disappeared completely. I'm getting at the difference between telling your side of a story and accepting that someone else may have a completely different version. Silence. The audience stopped moving. Even the band members seemed to be watching. Harry stared at Colbert for a moment. Then he gave a small, restrained smile. I don't think that's controversial. No, Colbert replied. He leaned back. Not yet. A few people laughed nervously. Harry didn't. The camera moved into a tighter shot. His jaw appeared slightly tense now. Colbert reached for his notes but didn't look down. "Let me ask you something more direct." Harry nodded once. "Okay." Colbert's voice became quieter. "If someone sitting in this audience disagrees with everything you've said about your past, do you believe they have the right to say that?" Harry hesitated. It was barely noticeable. But the pause was there. "Yes," he finally answered. Colbert nodded. "Good. Another beat. Because tonight, I want to test that." The audience reacted immediately. A mixture of laughter, surprise, and nervous applause filled the studio. Harry's expression changed. He looked toward the audience, then back at Colbert. "What exactly does that mean?" Colbert leaned forward across the desk. And then he asked the question that changed the entire atmosphere of the interview. Harry's smile vanished. The audience fell silent. And for the first time that night, Harry realized this wasn't going to be the friendly interview he had expected. But what Colbert asked next was about to push the conversation far beyond anything either of them had planned. The question hung in the studio like a spark suspended above gasoline. For several seconds, Prince Harry said nothing. The bright lights reflected across the polished floor, while the cameras remained locked on the two men. Even the audience seemed uncertain whether it was supposed to laugh. Stephen Colbert sat completely still behind the desk, his hands resting lightly on his notes, his expression calm but his eyes fixed firmly on Harry. Harry finally leaned forward. "What exactly are you asking me?" Colbert didn't answer immediately. He glanced toward the audience, then back at Harry. "I'm asking whether you believe that telling your version of events means everyone else has to accept it." Harry's lips pressed together. "No. That's not what I said. But it is what some people hear." Harry gave a short laugh, but there was no humor behind it. "I think people hear what they want to hear." The audience reacted with scattered murmurs. Colbert tilted his head slightly. "And do you?" Harry stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means," Colbert replied, his voice remaining surprisingly calm, "that maybe everyone in this room has a version of reality they're comfortable with." A pause. "And sometimes," Colbert continued, "the uncomfortable part is discovering that your version isn't the only one." Harry's expression hardened. He shifted in his chair and crossed his arms. "I came here to have a conversation." "So did I." "Then why does this feel like an interrogation?" That sentence triggered a wave of reaction from the audience. Some people gasped. Others applauded. Colbert's eyebrows rose slightly. For a fraction of a second, the host looked surprised. Then he leaned back and gave a restrained smile. "Because you're being asked questions you don't like." Harry immediately responded. "That's not the same thing." "No," Colbert said. "It isn't." The room went quiet again. Harry looked toward the audience. A few people were staring at him. Others were looking at Colbert. The energy had completely changed. What had begun as a light celebrity interview now felt like two people testing how far the other was willing to go. Harry uncrossed his arms. "You know what the problem is?" he said. Colbert waited. "The problem is that people decide who you are before you even speak." Colbert nodded slowly. "I agree with that." Harry seemed almost surprised by the answer. But Colbert continued. "Yet sometimes people also decide who they are going to be before anyone else gets the chance." Harry's eyes narrowed. The audience reacted with a collective murmur. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Harry shook his head. "I don't think you understand what it feels like." Colbert's expression softened slightly. "Maybe I don't." Harry looked down. His fingers tightened together. "When every decision you make becomes a headline, when every sentence gets analyzed, when people who have never met you decide what your intentions were, eventually you stop trying to explain yourself." His voice had become quieter. The room listened. For a moment, the confrontation seemed to disappear, replaced by something much more personal. Colbert leaned forward. But then why keep explaining? Harry looked up. That question stopped him. The audience remained completely silent. Harry opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes briefly moved toward the floor. Colbert didn't interrupt. Finally, Harry answered. Because sometimes silence is treated as guilt. A murmur moved through the audience. Colbert nodded slowly. That's a fair point. Harry relaxed slightly. But then Colbert added, but speaking doesn't automatically make someone right either. The tension returned instantly. Harry's face tightened. I never said it did. I know. Then why keep pushing? Because that's my job. The audience laughed nervously. Harry didn't smile. He leaned toward Colbert. And what happens when the host becomes part of the story? That sentence landed harder than anything before it. Colbert's smile disappeared. The audience reacted immediately. A few people applauded. Others whispered. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged quick glances. Colbert sat motionless for several seconds. Then he slowly placed his pen on the desk. You think I'm making this about myself? Harry replied without hesitation. I think you're enjoying this. Silence. A long silence. Colbert stared at him. The camera moved closer. Harry's breathing was visibly slower now, but his expression remained firm. Colbert finally spoke. If I wanted an easy interview, I wouldn't ask difficult questions. Harry shook his head. Difficult questions are one thing. Making assumptions is another. Colbert leaned forward. Then correct me. Harry paused. Gladly. The audience sensed what was coming. Harry's voice became more forceful. You don't know everything that happened behind closed doors. Colbert nodded. No. I don't. And neither does the audience. True. So maybe, Harry said, people should stop pretending they do. For the first time, applause erupted strongly from part of the audience. But another section remained completely silent. Colbert waited until the applause faded. Then he looked directly at Harry. Maybe. A pause. But if that's true, why keep bringing the doors into public? Harry froze. His expression changed immediately. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The question had landed. His eyes moved away from Colbert for a moment. The studio became completely silent. Harry looked back. And then, with a noticeably sharper tone, he said, because sometimes people need to know what happened. Colbert answered quietly. Or sometimes people need to know why it happened. Harry's jaw tightened. His hand moved toward the armrest. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Harry leaned forward and said something so unexpectedly direct that the audience gasped. Colbert's expression changed. He looked toward the producer. The producer immediately stepped closer to the control room monitor. The camera remained live. Harry continued. And suddenly, what had been a tense conversation was turning into a confrontation that nobody in the studio could control. But the biggest shock was still coming. Because moments later, Colbert would make a statement that would leave Harry staring at him in disbelief, and force the producers to consider whether the interview had gone too far. What happened next changed the atmosphere of the entire studio. The laughter was gone. The playful energy that had filled the room at the beginning of the interview had disappeared completely, replaced by a silence so heavy that even the smallest movement seemed amplified. Prince Harry remained seated, staring across the desk at Stephen Colbert, while Colbert held his gaze without blinking. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every subtle movement, the tightening of Harry's jaw, the slight movement of Colbert's hand across his notes, the nervous glance exchanged between two audience members in the front row. Harry finally spoke. You wanted honesty. Colbert nodded. Then let's have honesty. Harry leaned forward, his voice controlled but noticeably sharper than before. You keep asking me to explain myself, but you never ask whether the people criticizing me are willing to examine their own assumptions. Colbert listened without interrupting. Harry continued. You've built this entire conversation around what other people think I should have done, what they think I should have said, how they think I should feel. But they weren't there. A pause. I was. The words landed heavily. The audience remained silent. Colbert slowly nodded. I understand. Harry shook his head. No. I don't think you do. That sentence created another wave of tension. Colbert leaned back. For the first time during the confrontation, his expression looked less combative and more thoughtful. Then help me understand. Harry stopped. Something in his expression softened. For a moment, it looked as though the argument might finally be coming to an end. He looked down at his hands. When you live under that kind of pressure, he said quietly, you start measuring every word before you say it. You wonder who's going to twist it. You wonder which part will become tomorrow's headline. And eventually, you don't even know whether you're speaking because you want to or because you're defending yourself. The studio was completely still. Even Colbert didn't interrupt. Harry took a slow breath. So yes, sometimes I get defensive. Colbert nodded. And sometimes, Harry continued, I probably shouldn't. A few members of the audience applauded softly. The tension began to loosen. But Colbert wasn't finished. He leaned forward again. That's probably the most honest answer you've given tonight. Harry looked at him. Maybe. Colbert smiled faintly. And maybe that's what people wanted. Harry gave a small smile of his own. For several seconds, the two men simply looked at each other. The confrontation had reached a strange turning point. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't agreement. But it was understanding. Then Colbert asked one final question. If you could go back and change one thing about how you've handled everything publicly, what would it be? Harry looked toward the audience. The bright lights reflected in his eyes. He took several seconds before answering. I would probably spend less time trying to convince everyone that I was right. A pause. And more time accepting that some people will never see it the way I do. The audience reacted with a mixture of applause and silence. Colbert nodded slowly. That, he said, is an answer. Harry smiled. But then something unexpected happened. From the audience came a loud voice. Then why did you keep coming back? Everyone turned. The room erupted in surprised laughter. Harry looked toward the audience member. For the first time all night, he laughed genuinely. Colbert laughed too. The tension finally broke. The band played a short musical sting. The audience applauded. Harry shook his head and smiled. You know what? That's actually a good question. Colbert leaned back. See? I told you the audience could do my job. The crowd laughed again. The cameras slowly pulled back. The studio lights seemed warmer now. What had begun as a tense confrontation had ended somewhere neither man had expected, a place where neither side completely surrendered, but both had finally allowed the other to speak. Harry stood. Colbert stood behind the desk. For a moment, they faced each other. There was a brief handshake. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't exaggerated. It was simple. Two people acknowledging that the conversation had been difficult, uncomfortable, and perhaps necessary. The audience applauded as the camera moved toward a wide shot of the studio. But outside the fictional television moment, the lesson was bigger than the argument itself. Because sometimes the most explosive conversations aren't remembered because someone won. They're remembered because, for a few uncomfortable minutes, the polished television image disappears and something more human takes its place. A pause. A disagreement. A moment of frustration. And finally, a moment of understanding. The lights began to dim. The band started playing. The audience rose to its feet. Harry gave one final wave before walking backstage, while Colbert returned to his desk and looked toward the camera with a knowing smile. And just before the screen faded to black, one thought remained hanging in the air: maybe the real question was never who won the argument. Maybe the real question was whether anyone in that room was willing to listen. And that is what made the fictional confrontation so unforgettable. If you enjoyed this dramatic reenactment, make sure you like the video, leave your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who loves celebrity drama, explosive interviews, and unexpected television moments. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. And remember, this video is presented as fictionalized entertainment and dramatization. It is not intended to claim that the events portrayed actually happened. Until next time, stay tuned, because sometimes the quietest moment after an argument tells the biggest story.